All eyes are on Arizona as ballots continue to be counted there. Joe Biden currently leads President Trump by a very slim margin with more than 86% of the votes in. This comes as several protesters gathered outside of one voting center in Phoenix last night. And earlier, I spoke to CBS News correspondent Jamie Yuccas about the protests and where counting stands in the state.
We were here as one of those protests erupted at the Maricopa County Elections Department. There was a large group, probably about 200 people, who came between here and the state capitol, which is about a half-mile away. They started going back and forth in their cars, and they were demanding that the votes be released. They think that the votes are not being counted, and if they are, that they're not being counted correctly. The protests were mostly peaceful, I do want to say that, but there were about a third of the crowd we could see with our own eyes did in fact have guns on them. They were armed. Many of them had assault rifles just out in their hands. Others had their conceal and carry and were carrying handguns, sometimes on their waistband. We did talk to one man who was armed and said that he was here to do that to protect himself and the other people in the crowd, and that it was his right to do that, which it is, with a conceal and carry permit here in the state of Arizona. So we did see that. At one point, the protesters, besides chanting to get the ballots counted and get the results out, they also did lead a prayer at one point in time in the parking lot, and then, as I said, went back and forth between here and the state capitol. They had lots of President Trump flags. They were very pro-President Trump supporters who were here demanding that the votes get counted. What I can also tell you about this elections department, Anne Marie, is that they are very much about transparency and making sure that the vote is counted correctly. We were inside on Election Day, and officials showed us their process, and they're saying it's slow because they want this to be right. So a couple of things that we learned while we were inside is that when votes are tabulated, they go up into a very secure wired system, into a locked room on a server. It's never connected to the internet, so it can't be hacked. Also, if there's a dispute on the ballot is taken, and just the section that's being disputed is taken over to two people, a Democrat and Republican, to look at it. Both of those people have to agree as to how they believe the vote was supposed to be tallied, and then it is sent back and tabulated that way. So one thing that was concerning here when those protests erupted is that there are a number of people inside trying to do the work at the Maricopa County Elections Office, and they did last night have to be escorted by the sheriff's office back to their cars as they went to leave. So the protest was peaceful, but the people inside were uncomfortable enough that they did leave with the help of the sheriff's department.
See, and that just slows things down even more, right, if they have to stop and start back up again. So let us talk about the votes that are being counted, because, you know, this election is different in so many ways. So we have, you know, the votes that were cast the day of. We have the mail-in ballots that came in weeks ago. We have the last-minute drop-off ballots. So give us a sense of, you know, what are they counting now? And, you know, people may wonder why we're sort of holding off on coming to a conclusion. We know that depending on how the ballots were received, you know, sometimes Democrats tend to vote in a certain way, Republicans tend to vote in a certain way, depends on the county that they're coming from. So just let us know, what are they actually sort of counting now?
Yeah, you make really good points, and that is exactly what's happening here, is that everybody thought on election night that Arizona would very quickly get the results up and there wouldn't be much dispute about it, because they were actually able to start tabulating those ballots, mail-in ballots and early ballots, about 2 weeks ago. So they had gotten through most of their process of those. But when people came to the polls and they voted in person, or they came to drop off their mail-in ballot, those then had to start being counted on Election Day. The process is taking a long time because of the verification system they go through. Each ballot has to be looked at, signature verified, then run through the machine, as I talked about. If there are any problems, then it has to be looked at by both that Democrat and Republican, and for them to say, okay, this is okay, let's move this along. We were told that here in Maricopa County, which is the largest county by far in Arizona, it's Phoenix and its suburbs is what it includes, is that they can run about 6,000 to 8,000 200,000 ballots an hour. So we have about 275,000 ballots left. Yesterday, they had 450,000 ballots left. So the idea is that hopefully by the end of the day today, about 7 p.m. local time or 9 p.m. Eastern time, we should get hopefully the rest of the information and the ballots through the tabulation system and know where it stands. And the reason Maricopa County is so important, Anne-Marie, is because there are so many votes that come from here. Statewide, there's about 3.4 million people who vote. Maricopa County is about 60% of that vote. So the presidential candidate would have to win Maricopa County in order to win the state. Now, the other interesting point with that 3.4 million number is that a lot of people have said, wow, this race is really narrowed. If you look at it, you know, former Vice President Joe Biden had a really wide lead, and it's now narrowed to about 68,000 votes. But in this state, you only need 1/10 of 1% to have a recount. So it's very, very narrow. So with 3.4 million votes, that calculates out, if I'm doing my math correctly, to about 3,400 votes would have to be between the two candidates before a recount would happen here. So that's what people are watching, if that narrows even further. But the one thing about Maricopa County that's also changed is that, well, this has been a reliably Republican area, the demographics here have changed. So you've had a lot of younger people move in from more liberal states like California. They came out to vote. You had more suburban women show up at the polls who voted for former Vice President Joe Biden. And then you had the Latino population, which has increased here tremendously. Just between 2018 and 2020, 100,000 Latinos had reached voting age. So it's been a big shift in that demographic, and many people think that the majority of the votes will go to former Vice President Joe Biden, but we'll have to see. So there's enough there to keep an eye out, and people are anxious to get the results in. So hopefully we'll have those by the end of the day today.